Hi, my name is Jim Woodford, and it's a great privilege to be here, sharing a little of my journey with you. If you've ever felt like you're a lost cause, know that I'm here as living proof that, with God, there is never an end. I wrote a book about my unexpected journey, and I can assure you that if there's one word that describes it well, it's unexpected. I always get a little nervous talking about it. Sometimes I feel like if I forget something, I might miss the chance to touch someone who might need to hear it. So, I ask for your patience as I share with you a piece of my life. It all started on April 21st, 2014. I was not, in fact, a Christian. I was raised Catholic, but to be honest, that didn't mean much to me back then, other than that the church had a good hockey team. I was born in Newfoundland, Canada, a small province in the extreme northeast of the country, where summer seems to last a few hours. Or, at least, that's how I remember it. But despite the conditions, I loved that place. It was my home. I lost my father very early, at just 2 years old, and my mother, widowed at 23, had to raise 2 young children alone. Even in the face of difficulty, I had a wonderful upbringing. We lived with my paternal grandparents, an Irish Catholic family, and despite the pain of loss, our home was full of love. I don't have many memories of my father, but I always felt that he was surrounded by affection and support. Growing up in a remote area of the Canadian countryside, far from the hustle and bustle, was a unique experience and, in some ways, a great privilege. One of the things that impressed me most as a child were the seaplanes that landed on the lakes around us. Those planes, bringing supplies to distant places, made me fall in love with aviation. At 18, I decided I wanted to pursue this career, even though our financial situation was complicated. But somehow my mother managed to help me get a loan to pay for flight school, and I graduated in 1967. Now, imagine a world without cell phones, without satellites, where information took time to arrive. I grew up in the countryside, without the facilities of today, and started my career with a small bush plane airline. Over time, my career took off. I went to fly bigger aircraft and worked around the world. If you are lucky enough to have a profession that you love so much, that you would do for free and still get paid well, you are privileged, and I was, without a doubt. I loved traveling and ended up spending a lot of time outside of England, in countries in Africa and South America, working with cargo airlines. But if I look more clearly at my life now, I see that during those endless hours of flying at night over the South China Sea, where the sky and the sea blend into darkness, I should have reflected more on God. At that time, I wasn't exactly agnostic, but I also never sought to understand more deeply about Him. Like most people, I believed that someone or something was in control of the chaos in the world, but I never sought answers. I simply continued living my life, which was going well, with investments made during the technological boom of the 80s. My life seemed to flourish without much effort. Oh, and if you heard someone refer to me as Jim Diamante, yes, that was my nickname. That's how they saw me. Someone who was always in control, whether facing a failing engine at 35,000 feet or handling a successful business. Not because he was smarter than others, because he knew how to listen to the right people and learn from them. My life, until then, was comfortable. If I had to sum it up, I would say it was good. I had married a wonderful woman whom I met while riding together. And this is important to the story, as horses have always played a significant role in my life. When I was a child, living in a remote area, my grandfather worked with wood and used horses to do so. I grew up watching him, learning from him, and I always had a great admiration for these animals. They have always been part of my story and who I am. As time went by, life led me to achieve what I believed to be true happiness: wealth. For me, having money meant having freedom, or at least, that's what I thought. I started to get really good at accumulating material possessions, and I was rewarded for doing so. However, the fulfillment I sought, at least for a while, always seemed within reach, but it was never enough. I started acquiring things: a collection of British sports cars, a big boat, a new plane. I really enjoyed all of these things, but there were times when I would find myself lying awake at night wondering, is this all there is? Is this what life has to offer? Instead of searching for a deeper meaning, I thought that maybe the solution was simply to buy more. Another car, a faster plane, a bigger boat. And so, the next day, I went and bought it. But what I was really looking for, without knowing it, was far beyond material possessions. I was looking for something deeper, something that couldn't be bought, but I still didn't know exactly what it was. Today, looking back, I am amazed to realize that what I was missing, what really created that emptiness, was God. I didn't know that at the time. Despite the emptiness I felt, my life continued as many would consider perfect. A loving family, enough wealth to provide me with everything I needed and more, and impeccable health. I never had any major health problems until then. But around 2009 or 2010, something started to change. At first, I ignored the signs. I was Jim Diamante, and I believed I could overcome anything. But arrogance is treacherous. You don't realize how arrogant you are until a real calamity happens in your life. This is how I learned, the hard way, that to find God, you must first reach the end of yourself. I started to feel bad. One morning I woke up and couldn't get up. He was visibly weakened. I remember that Sunday. My wife had gone to church, as usual, while I stayed at home. When she returned, she immediately realized something wasn't right. As a nurse, he suggested I wait until Monday to see a doctor, so I did. At the office, the doctor told me that it was probably just the flu and recommended that I rest. However, my situation only got worse. 2 days later, I could no longer eat, and the paralysis began to intensify, making it difficult for me to move. I went back to the doctor. This time he seemed irritated, insisting that I was fine even though the blood tests hadn't come back yet. But I knew something was very wrong. However, 2 days later, when I returned to the clinic, I collapsed in the parking lot. Only then did things start to be taken serious. My worried wife insisted that I be admitted to the hospital. This happened between 2009 and 2010. And I don't blame the doctors for not identifying the problem immediately. At first, they thought it might be multiple sclerosis, but in fact, what was happening was something much rarer. I had contracted a disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome. For those unfamiliar, Guillain-Barré syndrome was identified by two French doctors, Guillain and Barré, after the First World War. Although rare, its incidence increased with the spread of the Zika virus. The condition causes deterioration of the myelin sheath in the brainstem, which prevents the nerves from performing their functions normally. The result of this is intense and severe pain, as well as serious motor limitation. At the hospital, doctors were still trying to figure out what was going on. Many professionals rarely see a case of this disease during their entire career, which makes its diagnosis even more challenging. It was then that a neurologist, who had only treated one Guillain-Barré patient in his entire life, was called. He did an exam in which he removed fluid from my spinal cord and, upon analysis, found high levels of protein, confirming the diagnosis. The syndrome has a critical period to be treated using plasmapheresis and immunoglobulin therapy. However, in my case, almost 2 weeks had passed, and I was already in critical condition. The paralysis progresses rapidly, and if it affects the lungs, death is inevitable. They began intensive blood transfusions to try to control the situation, but Guillain-Barré spread without stopping. Fortunately, little by little, I started to improve. But you would think that after going through something like that, I would have looked up to the sky and thanked God, even without full faith. However, that's not what happened. As I mentioned before, arrogance is a treacherous thing. With all due respect, airline pilots, especially captains, are often seen as arrogant, but it doesn't come naturally. When you spend your life transporting hundreds of people safely to their destinations, you start to feel invincible, and that is dangerous. You need to be careful, because this confidence can easily turn into arrogance. Think about it. You're flying at 35,000 feet in the air, facing severe weather conditions, and behind you are hundreds of people, all just wanting to get home. This responsibility of carrying lives makes you feel special. In fact, when I talk about the people on board, the technical term used in flight manifests is souls on board. This expression is used in a practical way to identify living passengers in the event of an accident. If there are more bodies than passengers listed, for example, It is possible to know that there were also coffins being transported. It is a technical term that, although it causes confusion or even scares some people, is used for safety reasons. Anyway, back to my story. Even though I survived and began recovery, the process was long and painful. I went through months of intense physical therapy, trying to relearn how to walk, swallow, and even talk. Yet the chronic pain persisted. Pain so intense, it consumed everything around me and affected every aspect of my life. Anyone who has experienced something like this knows that it is impossible to ignore. When I finally felt strong enough to travel, I sought out the best medical treatments around the world, but to my frustration, none brought significant relief. Guillain-Barré syndrome is so rare that there is very little research on it. A specialist suggested I try an experimental medicine from England. My doctors got special permission from the Canadian government to import the medicine, and surprisingly, it worked. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it gave me a few hours of relief a day, reducing the pain by up to 75%. That was, without a doubt, a true gift. But I soon realized that when I took larger doses than prescribed, the relief lasted longer and was even more intense. That's when I started down a dangerous path, self-medication. After 3 years of constant pain and loneliness, without being able to ride horses, fly planes, or play the sports he loved, any relief seemed tempting. And without telling the doctors or my wife, I started increasing the dosage. As he traveled frequently, it was easy to get prescriptions refilled without arousing suspicion. By 2014, I still depended on high doses of medication to be able to function, even with a lot of pain. During this period, I decided to get rid of some assets, such as companies and property. It was then, that April, that I received a request from a company that was surveying a large area of land that I was trying to sell. They wanted me to check the boundaries of the land. Even though my doctor had advised me to avoid driving, I decided to go anyway. It was late afternoon, early evening, and the soft spring light created a serene atmosphere around. I parked my truck facing the sunset, turned off the engine, and sat there, trying to muster up the strength to walk across the vast terrain and check out the landmarks. I remember thinking, I don't know if I can do this. It's too far. That's when I realized that I had hidden some medications in the vehicle, as I usually did to prevent my wife from finding out that I was abusing the medication. While going through things in the truck's glove compartment and console, I found the bottle of medicine. There was a bottle of soda there too, and I thought, a few more pills won't hurt after all. What's one more? Famous last words. I took more pills, even though I knew I had already far exceeded the prescribed dose. That day, I sat back in the truck, waiting for the feeling of relief, that reduction of pain that I already knew so well. But something different started to happen. Suddenly, I felt an intense heat in my legs, so strong that I thought the truck was on fire. I quickly looked down, but there were no flames. This violent heat rose through my legs, took over my body, and spread, going from the tips of my fingers towards my chest. At that moment, I was sure that I had done something catastrophic, something that was putting my life at risk. It was like the cab of the truck was filling with water, and I was struggling to lift my head and breathe, but I couldn't. That's when I realized I was dying. I've always considered myself a skeptical person, but there's an old saying that there are no atheists in the trenches. Well, there aren't atheists dying in pickup trucks either. I remember raising a trembling hand toward the setting sun. From somewhere deep inside me, a place I hadn't visited in a long time, came an overwhelming feeling. It wasn't fear. I had already faced engine failures, difficult landing. What I felt was regret. I had lived what many would consider a life of absolute success, but I had never thanked the Creator, if He even existed. With a trembling hand raised to the sun, I screamed the first 3 words of 6 that were about to leave my mouth. God, forgive me. These words came from a place inside me that I barely recognized. As soon as I said them, I collapsed onto the steering wheel, hitting my head hard. Then everything went dark. The next moment, I remember, was an intense pain in my forehead. When I came to, I realized I was still in the truck, looking outside. I knew that some time had passed, as the sun was already on the horizon, but what struck me immediately was that the pain was gone. Finally, I thought the medicine worked. I believed that the solution was to drink the entire bottle. I got out of the truck and walked about 20 feet. I felt incredible, like I had taken off a heavy wet coat. Along with all the pain, it was like I was 16 again. I was euphoric. I could hear the birds, smell the spring grass, and I felt at peace. But as I looked back, I saw something that made me angry. There was someone inside the truck, and not only that, the person had the audacity to be asleep at the wheel. I decided to confront that intruder. I started walking towards the truck, but soon realized that my feet were barely moving. It was like being in one of those dreams where you try to run, but can't. I was perplexed. If I felt so good, why couldn't I walk normally? Despite the difficulty, I continued moving slowly. When I looked back at the truck, the realization hit me like a shock. The person behind the wheel was not a stranger. It was me. How was this possible? I was there, but I was also seeing my own body slumped over the steering wheel, blood running from my mouth and nose. In my arrogance, my first reaction was to think, if I can just get back to my body, everything will be fine. Do it. So I kept struggling to get closer to him. Suddenly, I started to climb. As a pilot, I have a good sense of altitude and knew I was climbing, slowly but steadily. I was completely perplexed, trying to understand how this was happening. When I looked down, I saw the bed of my truck, the toolbox. Everything seemed so clear. Then something made me look away and look up. In front of me, about 60 meters away, a golden circle appeared, something like a gigantic wedding ring, about 20 meters in diameter. Suddenly, the center of that circle was filled with intense golden light. It was as if the circle was opening inward, like the door of an ancient safe. Instantly, my body tilted, as if it were being pulled towards that light, at a 45-degree angle. The feeling was so strong that it felt like something external was drawing me there. If you've ever lived completely isolated from the world, it's difficult to understand, but everyone has heard of the famous tunnel of light. I confess that I never gave this idea much attention until, suddenly, I started moving towards it. As I crossed the golden ring, I noticed an immense landscape covered by golden clouds with a distinct path in the center. As soon as I realized what I was seeing, the sensation of acceleration was overwhelming, as if I had pushed the throttles of a jet to reach takeoff speed. It was a tremendous force, as if I was being propelled at high speed through the tunnel of light, with my body reclined at more than 45 degrees. To give you an idea of the speed, I could see the stars around me, and in a moment of clarity, I remembered sharing this experience at a talk in Baltimore. One guy said, "That sounds like the opening of Star Trek," and he was right. It was a pretty accurate analogy, but what terrified me and left me even more confused was the fact that, being a technical person, always trying to understand how and why things happen, I couldn't find a rational explanation for it. Another thing that left a deep impression on me was the complete absence of sound. When we're speeding, whether in a convertible, a boat, or a motorcycle, we always hear the wind cutting through the air, the sound of speed. But there was nothing, just absolute silence, despite the sensation of moving at incredible speed. And even with all that, I was terrified. Suddenly, I noticed an even brighter light ahead, more intense than the light around me. As I approached, the speed decreased, and my body returned to an upright position. When I got close, I found myself in front of something that looked like a door or portal, covered in mist. I felt like the tunnel behind me was closing, and there was no other option but to move forward. Hesitantly, I put one foot inside the portal, not knowing exactly where I was stepping. When I felt something solid, I stepped forward with the other foot. As the fog began to clear, I looked down and was amazed at what I saw. The most perfect grass I had ever seen. Each sheet was impeccably symmetrical and uniform. At that moment, I thought to myself, the grass really is greener on the other side. We're talking about heaven. When the fog in front of me completely dissipated, I looked to my right and saw a field covered in flowers of a multitude of colors, many of which I had never seen before. The first thing I noticed was the vastness of the fields in front of me. I've traveled to 52 countries, seen stunning landscapes, but nothing compared to this. The ripples of the earth stretched as far as the eye could see, all under a deep blue sky, darker than anything I had ever seen on Earth. There was no heat from the sun, as we are used to, and as a pilot, I tried to orient myself. If I could locate the sun, I might be able to identify the southeast or southwest, but there was no point of origin for the light there. It was as if everything around emanated its own glow, creating a fusion of colors that seemed magical, but at the same time, disturbing. When I turned my head to the left, the scenery changed drastically. The green grass gave way to brown soil, which soon turned dark, almost black, as if it had been burned. The contrast was stark, as if two distinct worlds collided at that point. Driven by curiosity, I took a few cautious steps towards that darkness, trying to understand what could cause such a difference in colors. As I got closer, I noticed that the dark ground sloped down into a gorge. The walls of the abyss were made of something resembling coal, glowing with the intensity of anthracite. Far below, something seemed to glow red, as if it were a distant, lonely fire, illuminating a forgotten valley. The surrounding environment was dense and oppressive, filled with a sense of sadness and fear. We always hear about the fear of darkness, but at that moment, I felt that this place was the very incarnation of that fear. As I walked away, something changed. The fire at the bottom of the abyss became more intense, and then, to my surprise, a light began to shine from the side, as if a door was being opened. The sound of large creaking doors filled the air, as if rusty hinges were being strained. And, from within that portal, something began to emerge. The door was immense, as was the creature that came out of it. I looked down and saw a gigantic being with a rounded body covered in flame. Its flat head, which extended past its shoulders, moved curiously, as if it was searching for something in the depths of the abyss. Suddenly, it seemed like she noticed me. His head swiveled toward me, and his bright eyes fixed on me. I will never forget the look of hatred I felt at that moment. It wasn't just hatred directed at me, but at humanity as a whole. Furthermore, a horrible smell started to emanate from that place. It was the odor of decay, as if all the evil and rot in the world had been concentrated in that being. I couldn't bear to look any longer. As I turned to run, before I could turn completely around, I saw the creature beginning to scale the walls of the abyss. For something so immense, she moved with surprising agility. I stumbled and fell backwards onto my elbows as she emerged completely from the abyss, towering in front of me. His fiery body continued to burn, and saliva dripped from his mouth. His face was absolutely terrifying, but what shook me most was the sound emanating from his body. It didn't come from her mouth, but it seemed to well up inside her, as if there were souls trapped inside, screaming for mercy. The creature, now completely out of the abyss, began to approach me. On impulse, I tried to maintain my sanity. I quickly got up, turned to face her, and started running. That's when I remembered the 6 words I had said in a previous experience. I had already shouted the first 3. "God, forgive me!" I screamed, my heart pounding as I turned toward the bright light. Without hesitation, I raised my hands and, with all the strength I had left in me, I cried out the next 3 words, "God, help me." The moment I finished speaking, something extraordinary happened. 3 points of light appeared in the deep blue sky, approaching with impressive speed. One came from approximately 90 degrees, another from 260, and the last from 310, all converging in my direction. Meanwhile, the creature continued behind me. In addition to the echoing screams, a familiar voice resounded, pronouncing my name. She knows who I am, I thought, stunned. What did I do to deserve this? I wasn't perfect, but I didn't think of myself as a terrible person either. The creature's voice was mixed with a growl and a deep whisper, and, as if in my mind, I heard it say, "Jim, Jim, we're here for you. Join us." The dread was immense, almost paralyzing, but I knew I couldn't let my attention wander. I stared at the approaching lights, feeling a clear intuition. I couldn't look back. I couldn't look at the creature. If he did, he knew he would be captured. The lights came even closer, converging around me, and when they finally reached me, I was enveloped by them in an indescribable way. The light seemed to penetrate every cell of my being, bringing a peace I had never experienced before. Out of pure curiosity, I looked back. The instant the light touched the creature, it let out a deafening scream of agony, and, like a mouse fleeing into the shadows, it quickly retreated. There, I understood something fundamental. Darkness and evil cannot coexist in the light of God. They simply have no place in the divine presence. When I looked back at the light, something wonderful happened. 3 magnificent beings began to approach. They were tall, elegant, and exuded indescribable beauty. Their silver hair shone, and a golden light emanated from their wings, creating a celestial halo around them. The first being approached me, and what struck me most was the deep look in his eyes. Imagine beings as imposing as these, measuring approximately 3 meters, 3.5 meters, and the last one, the largest, dressed as a warrior, almost 4.5 meters tall. The latter seemed to be a true guardian angel. When the first being looked at me, I saw that its eyes were such a deep violet that it seemed like something beyond what I could comprehend. He started talking to me, but his lips didn't move. It was something deeper than telepathy. He was on my mind, and I was on his. When I say he or they, I don't want to use the term androgynous, but those beings seem to bring together the best of everything we are. They possessed the gentleness of a female figure, the strength of a warrior, and an incredible combination of all that is good. Suddenly, I felt a welcoming arm wrap around my shoulder. I looked up and saw a huge feathered wing emerging from that arm, pulling me into the being's chest. The touch was comforting, as if all the fear and darkness had been lifted. I looked back into those violet eyes, and in my mind, I heard a soft, beautiful voice saying, "Fear not, James, for we are your steadfast friends, and we will always be by your side." I there snuggled up to something that I always thought was just a legend, a myth, felt safe in a way that words cannot describe. That hug, that light, the feeling of being protected, everything made me feel warm and at peace. And then, something more peculiar happened. Maybe it seems strange, but at that moment, while being hugged, I noticed an incredible smell, something sweet and invigorating, as if the very essence of good was there, around me. The aroma I smelled at that moment was something peculiar. It was the smell of hot tapioca. I know this may sound strange, but I'm not here to found the Sagrada Tapioca Church. However, there is something important I need to share. God somehow understands the profound impact of this encounter on our lives, and to help us understand and feel at home, He offers us something familiar, something we loved when we were children. For me, this comfort came through the smell of tapioca. When I was little, on freezing mornings in northern Canada, after walking for hours in snowstorm, I would arrive at my grandmother's house, where she would always prepare hot tapioca on the wood stove. The smell of that food was the greatest comfort I could have. Perhaps for others, this smell reminds you of your mother's perfume or the aroma of something your father used to make. Maybe it's another type of affective memory, but for me, it was tapioca. That, at that moment, was a clear sign of welcome and affection. God, with His infinite wisdom, knows what each of us needs. It offers us something familiar, something that makes us feel like we are at home. It is clear that each report of spiritual experience is unique. It reflects our personality, our experiences, and, above all, what connects us to the divine. But, in the end, all these encounters have one thing in common. They highlight the greatness of God and His ability to understand us in a deep and intimate way. Going back to my story, the angels I encountered were simply incredible. They exuded security, wisdom, and an intoxicating peace. One specific memory sticks out in my mind. They bowed before me. It was a gesture so full of reverence and respect that it made me feel uncomfortable, as if I were the one who should bow down to them. This made me question the reason for this attitude, and one of the angels replied, "James, you don't know, but when we look at humanity, we see the spark of life of our Master." That left me speechless. We, who so often consider ourselves insignificant, are actually admired by the angels. They view us with immense respect. We walked for some time, and I will summarize because they showed me many things and revealed many truths. Along the way, something extraordinary happened. I've developed what I call 360-degree vision. I could hear everything, understand everything. The flowers around me, as beautiful as I've ever seen them, seemed to sing to me. Finally, we arrived at a lush green field, and, interestingly, I think the angels knew about my love for horses. I don't know how this connects to my love of tapioca, but I realized that they used these simple, familiar things to bring us joy and comfort. It was then that the second guardian raised his hand, and suddenly a group of horses appeared from behind a hill. The grass beneath their hooves glowed with incredible light, and they were 3 of the most magnificent horses I had ever seen. At the time, I didn't know that the Bible mentions Jesus returning on a white horse, but what I saw was absolutely stunning. The horses came to the fence and looked at me with an intensity of love in their eyes that I had never seen before. I reached out, wanting to stroke the led horse's neck, but when I touched him, my hand sank into his body, which seemed to be made of pure light. As I stepped back, I noticed that the light stuck to my hand for a few centimeters before returning to the horse's body. That feeling was indescribable, and ever since then, I've called it God's sticky love. I know it's a peculiar expression, but it's exactly what I felt at that moment. It was as if God's love was literally tied to me, unbreakable and immeasurable. After that, we continued the walk. They showed me more things, many of which I will cherish forever. At a certain point, I realized that one of the guardians was next to me. He said to me, "Take hold of my cloak." Without hesitation, I did as he asked, and suddenly we found ourselves above it all, looking down as if we were floating above the world. The feeling of being so close to divinity, as if I were part of it, was simply overwhelming. At first, I thought I was looking at a reflecting pool, but I soon realized that what I was seeing was not a reflection of the earth, but rather an aerial view of the sky. I avoid using the term celestial tourism because it sounds pejorative, as if it were something just imaginary or fanciful. Deep in my heart, I know that what I experienced was absolutely real. It was not a figment of my imagination or a hallucination. The vision I had allowed me to contemplate how the sky is organized. There, I saw the halls of knowledge and the halls of wisdom. Yes, the streets are made of gold, but not the kind we know on Earth. This gold wasn't shiny or flashy, like what we see in places like Fort Knox. It was a soft gold, with a warm, serene light, unlike any idea I had about precious metal. One building, in particular, caught my attention. It was made of a material that radiated light, but in a welcoming, soft way, not aggressive or exaggerated, like an intense Las Vegas light. I was attracted to it and asked what that building was. The response I received surprised me deeply. "This is where the children's souls are," I was told. When I asked further, they explained to me that in that building were the souls of children who had been aborted or who died in their innocence, victims of illness or other tragic circumstance. They told me that each of these souls is precious to God, and that there they are cared for and protected, growing at a different pace, as they do not have a physical body. They develop about 3 times faster than children on Earth. That space, that building, is where those souls are loved and cared for. This part of the experience was deeply impactful for me, especially when thinking about women who have lost children or experienced miscarriages during difficult times. It is an immense comfort to be able to tell these mothers that their children still live in a place where they are cared for and loved by God. Returning to my journey, after being shown all this, we returned to paradise, which is outside the walls of the celestial city. I was looking at the horses again when I realized that it had been some time since I had seen my guardian. As I turned to look for him, I saw that he was about 40 or 50 feet away, on a small rise. When I looked closer, I noticed something even more impressive. He was healed, in an almost kneeling position, holding a book. Before him, there was a figure even more magnificent than the angels. I couldn't see his face clearly as he was in profile to me, but there was a glow around him, similar to the heat that distorts vision on hot asphalt during the summer. This glow covered the features of this extraordinary being, but it was clear that he was reading what my guardian held. I noticed that the book the guardian held was surprisingly thin, almost like a simple restaurant menu. And then, suddenly, I realized what it was. It was the book of my life. It was not a large volume full of good deeds or great deeds. To my surprise and, in a way, embarrassment, the book was small and thin. Charles Dickens wrote a phrase that stuck in my mind: "Humanity should have been my business." However, my life was too focused on the pursuit of wealth and material success. And there was the reflection of that, an almost empty book. At that moment, I made a decision. If I had the opportunity to go back, I would do everything differently. I would live so that when the chapter of my life was written, it would need 3 angels and even a crane to lift the volume. This desire to change, to do more for humanity and less for myself, took over me with an intensity that I had never felt before. As he watched the scene, the magnificent being leaned forward, examining the contents of the small book. Suddenly, he straightened up, and the guardian closed the book, tucking it back into his sleeve before disappearing. Then, this majestic figure turned towards me. As she moved from profile to face me directly, the glow that covered her features began to slowly fade. That was when, surprisingly, I found myself face to face with none other than Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I always thought of Jesus as a legendary figure, something invented by someone in the past. But there he was, in front of me, looking at me with an indescribable intensity. His presence was completely magnificent, radiating a love and concern so deep I almost couldn't bear it. A golden light emanated from his entire body, starting from his head and descending like water, flowing slowly, enveloping and warm. This light seemed to flow from his figure and down the slope where we stood. I was overcome by an overwhelming feeling that I had finally arrived home, that I had found what I had been looking for all my life. Without thinking, I fell to my knees, my body wanting to get closer to him, and I began to crawl towards him, feeling the urgency to be closer to that love. When his eyes met mine, I saw a mix of gray, green, and blue, something so profound it seemed impossible. It was like I was lost in eternal love. He knew me deeply, but not with hate, not with judgment. He knew me with immeasurable love and unconditional forgiveness. For a brief moment, I felt that I was the only being in creation, the only being he had created. Even though I knew, intellectually, that it didn't make sense, the intensity of the connection was such that I felt like nothing else mattered. In that look, I understood that I was his forever. Nothing in the world could separate me from him, and all I wanted at that moment was to be close to him. I tried to keep getting closer, but then 2 guardians appeared beside me and held me back. I struggled to free myself, still trying to move forward on my knees toward Jesus. He, however, raised his right hand, and although he still smiled gently, his gesture was clear and imposing. "Stop." The feeling of not being able to move forward was painful, a weight that I didn't know how to carry. I stood there, my heart in anticipation, completely absorbed by the love in his eyes. I took another step or 2 on my knees, but when he raised his hand even higher, his cloak slid down, revealing the marks of the crucifixion. It crossed me in an indescribable way. I knew in that moment that he had gone through everything for me. It was then that he looked at me with an intensity I cannot express and began to speak. People often ask me what Jesus' voice was. It's difficult to describe precisely, but unlike angels, whose communication was more telepathic, Jesus spoke like us, moving his lips. When I heard his voice, I was surprised to realize that he knew my name. He knew me, and with a gentle smile, keeping his hand still raised, he said, "James, my son, it is not your time yet. Go back and tell your brothers and sisters about the wonders we have shown you." His words, simple and powerful, echoed in my soul. It was as if everything I had experienced up to that point was an invitation to a deeper mission, a call to share with the world the truths that had been revealed to me. In the midst of the pain of having to move away from him, something stronger than myself told me that my journey was not over, but that there was something more to be done, something more to be lived. He calmly lowered his hand and crossed them over the left side of his body. A wave of emotion came over me, not only because he knew my name, but also because, little by little, I realized that I wouldn't be allowed to stay there. Fear and despair began to take over. I began to beg, almost desperately, "Please, let me stay. This is all I've been looking for my entire life. I just want to be where you are. Please don't send me back." I remember saying something that seemed so naive and childish. "I promise, I won't cause any trouble." Just imagine, I was there, before the Son of God, saying something like that, but I was completely desperate. At that moment, 2 guardians appeared beside me. With a gentle force, they lifted me off the ground and began to lead me back along the path we had taken. I resisted. I turned around, trying to look one last time, and begged again to stay. But when I looked at where Jesus was, he was no longer there. In his place, now, was the magnificent being, the warrior angel who had received me. Its imposing presence seemed to grow before my eyes, easily exceeding 4.5 meters in height. He spread his wings in all their glory, and a brilliant, golden light radiated around him. The message was clear. He was there to block my path, to prevent me from moving forward. Feeling the hands of the angels holding me, the environment around me fell apart, and suddenly, everything went dark. I was in a black tunnel, listening to the distant sound of water, feeling a biting cold and a pain that seemed to consume me. It was as if I were descending at high speed, but, unlike the tunnel of light I already knew, there was no beauty at all, just darkness. I was later informed that my condition in the hospital was desperate. Doctors had told my wife, Lorene, that there was no brain activity, no signs of dreams, hallucinations, or responses. My body was in complete failure, and the devices were only maintaining the blood flow to my organs. The doctors suggested that she wait for our children to say goodbye before turning off life support. But in an instant, something extraordinary happened. I sat up suddenly, scaring the nurses in the room. They ran to call my wife, saying, "Madam, come quickly. Something is happening." Lorene, who was also a nurse, ran into the room, not believing what she was seeing. My eyes were wide, trying to comprehend the transition between heaven and lying on a gurney. She climbed into bed with me, crying, as the monitors showed my blood pressure returning to normal and my organs resuming their functions. Eventually, they removed the tubes so I could talk. My throat was sore and dry, but I managed to look into Lorene's face and say, with a mixture of disbelief and relief, "Lorene, I saw Jesus, and Jesus has horses." Of all the things I could have said, this is what came out of my mouth. Jesus has horses, and somehow I knew I was back. Now, there are many directions to go after everything I've shared, but to be direct and to the point about why I'm back, I can sum it all up in the words Jesus said to me, "James, my son, your time is not yet. Go back and tell your brothers and sisters about the wonders we have shown you." Sati, that's what I try to do every day. Share this message with as many people as possible. As for skeptics, I know some may think I'm just trying to sell books, but it's important to make it clear that the funds raised through my work are intended to help those most in need. It's not much, but we do what we can. The fact is that many people who share stories like mine do so not out of ambition, but out of a sense of duty. For me, this became a mission that I felt was directly God-given, to share my experience to inspire and comfort others. In the beginning, when I started talking publicly about this, I used to say that I didn't know why God chose me. But at one of these talks, an older man who was sitting in the front row stood up and said to me, "Jim, why not you? Why not you?" He continued, "You're going to live a life full of criticism, but none of that matters because you're doing what God told you to do. Go and tell your brothers and sisters." That's what drove me to continue. It was with the help of my friends at Destiny Publishing, known through my co-author Tom Gardner, that I was convinced to write the book. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be seen as someone who did this for the money. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, there are people who actually do this for less than noble reason, but I don't know why I was chosen. I just know that I'm trying to do my best for God. When Jesus asks something of you, It is as if a strength you have never felt before fills your being. I'm just doing what He asked me to do. I spent 11 hours in heaven, but let me explain. That time was counted from the moment I was found to the moment I was resuscitated, as recorded in my medical documents. However, for me, the time there was different. It doesn't matter if it was 11 hours, 11 years, or 11 seconds. Everything I needed to learn, or rather, everything they wanted me to learn, I learned. And, to the cynics and the negative comments on social media, it doesn't matter. In the face of the hundreds of thousands of people who have said to me, "You helped me so much." 2 days ago, a man called me and said, "I was ready to take my own life. I saw you on a TV show when I was about to walk out the door to jump off a bridge." Woody, this kind of testimony is simply incredible, and I hope it is recorded in the book of my life, so that if I am chosen to return to heaven, it will be something worth Jesus' time to read. I thank you all, and may God bless you. Now, as I share this extraordinary testimony, I want to invite you to reflect on your own life and choices. Have you ever felt lost or empty, even though you have achieved everything you ever wanted? Have you ever stopped to think that maybe what's missing in your life is what Jim discovered on his journey? God? How many times have you tried to fill the void with material good, temporary achievement? What if, like him, you gave yourself the opportunity to seek something deeper, something eternal? Jim's story teaches us that no matter how far we've gone or how many barriers we've faced, it's never too late to meet the Creator and start over. The question is, are you willing to make this change in your life? Are you willing to seek the true peace and purpose that only God can offer? If this testimony has touched your heart, I invite you to act now. Subscribe to the channel to continue learning more about how to transform your life with God's help. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any content that could be the key to your fresh start. Remember, change starts within you. God bless you!